So what's the projected cost of shutting down and replacing UK gas and coal power stations in the next 30 years?
Okay. So I don't think there is going to be a cost at all. So 10 years ago, there was quite a lot of talk about how switching to wind power was going to be really expensive and gas was the cheap thing to do. And at the time, offshore wind was really expensive. But fast forward 10 years to now, they're selling contracts for new offshore wind turbines, which are like 5 times cheaper than new gas power stations. So we've gone through that phase of the initial wind farms, offshore wind farms were really expensive, and now they're dirt cheap. And I know that gas power might not stay really high. It's really high at the moment because of the Russia-Ukraine war, but they're not going to come down that much that it'll be more cheaper than offshore wind again. And solars are going to keep dropping in price. So I think that over time, we just wean ourselves slowly off gas, shut them down as they finish their lifetimes, accelerate the amount of solar and wind that we've got, and I don't think the cost's going to be an issue there. 10 years ago, I think it was a really strong argument that there are big costs here, but now it's not the case.
No. It's like I said last week, it's where they're putting them. The communities by the coast don't like where they're put.
Quite a lot of them are really a very long way out. The ones at Hornsea and Doggerbank.
Skegness,
Skegness,
yeah.
I've watched Skegness develop from a handful to thousands.
Is this offshore or onshore?
Offshore.
Literally,
Yeah.
and they're dangerous as well. You've got the farmers, literally sheep are getting killed.
I guess it's a balance, isn't it, Dean?
No, I understand that. But literally, they are dangerous, especially in winter, because the icicles, you can switch them on and off. These wind farms, they're dangerous because literally people remotely switch them on and off. And people don't know that.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And the blades have a tendency to fly off.
Yeah, and
People
literally,
in cities
the hikers
don't
up in West Yorkshire don't know that. Ice flies off those things and literally kills sheep and all sorts. People don't know that.
I think it's certainly true that every form of energy generation will have
I know.
some downsides to it, and the same things like you have gas-fired power stations which blow up, nuclear accidents,
Of course.
coal is dirty,
Of course.
and there are problems with solar and wind as well. I totally get your point.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a shipping guy, obviously.
Shipping to shipping.
Yeah. And some of the fuels we're talking about for shipping, they're much better for climate change, but then they've got risks associated with them as well, which is why I always think for climate change, the first thing is to use less energy and use it more efficiently. So you minimise what you've got to produce from other sources.
That's very good, Simon, because that leads into our next question.
Wow. You thought I did that deliberately.
Coming back to your group.
So what can we do to reduce our personal carbon footprint? And I think when we were asking this, we meant like particularly what would you say are the most efficient things that we can do that are simple things that any of us can do, I guess.
Yeah. So I think there are four really big things about reducing your own footprint, and some of them quite a lot of you won't do already. So you've got not a lot more you can do. The first one is eating less meat. So meat varies in its carbon footprint. Some forms of meat consumption are very high carbon, some are much lower. But generally, if you eat a lot of meat, just eat some less meat. So have meat 3 times a week rather than 5. I think if you had a burger a day, which I admit would be an awful lot, a burger a day would be 3 tons of carbon dioxide a year, whereas a flight to New York is about 1 ton. So meat's quite a big deal. If you can eat less meat, then that's a good thing to do. Flying is the next thing. Lots of people don't fly, but some people fly quite a lot. So if you fly, I would say fly less. If you're going to go on holiday to Europe, then go by train. I admit that's more expensive to do. Some flights are really cheap, and that's another problem. Third thing is, the third biggest form of your carbon footprint is your personal travel that isn't flying. So how you get to work, how you go to the shops, and a lot of that's determined by where you live. If you live out in the countryside, you don't have a lot of options, but you live here in Shipley, the buses and the trains are pretty good. Cycling could be safer, but yeah, I would say drive less is the third thing. And the fourth one, which is hard for quite a lot of people to do because it's out of your control, is use less energy in your house. And the biggest thing is how you heat your home. And for example, for me, I know I cut what we use in our house as much as we can, and we've got a reasonably new gas boiler, but it's an old leaky house. It's difficult to insulate it. So finding ways to cut your home heating down.
Wear warmer clothing.
Yeah, I will wear my, when I work at home, I'm about 4 layers. I'm like Michelin man.
Okay, come to Stacey's group.
Excuse me, the valid point there is that the advice given for home heating assumes you're wearing ordinary everyday outdoor clothing, not sitting around like I do in t-shirt and shorts.
Yeah.
The social housing issue, I live in an almshouse in Saltaire
Oh yeah.
on Victoria Road.
Yeah,
What
I
are
know.
Green Communities doing about stepping up and sorting out?
Exactly.
Well, that's a really big thing because I don't want anyone to think that climate change is all about individual action of the sort of sorting our own concern. A lot of the things that need to happen are the responsibility of in communities, Bradford Council, the national government, all of that.
Which again leads us into our next question, which is
Very much. Yeah, what would be the possibility for Shipley to produce its own power, either by wind or solar, you know, or combination of the two?
There's lots of potential. So it depends who's doing it and what. So individuals, if you own your house, you can do your own stuff, like put solar panels on your roof. That's a lot cheaper than it was 10 years ago when it was just nobody could afford to do it unless you were really rich. The prices have come down. But there are Bradford Council, and I don't know to what extent it does this already, but Bradford Council owns a lot of land. It could invest in putting solar panels or wind turbines on the land and the buildings it uses. As an example of that, it's not the council so much, but Shipley Swimming Pool has got solar panels on its roof to heat up the water in the swimming pool. Saltaire Primary School and Glen Eyre Primary Schools have both got solar panels on their roofs, which was quite a difficult job for them because they're like near the heritage area or close to it, so there's planning problems with it. So that wasn't easy, but they've done it. So I think there's lots of things that can be done. The weir in Roberts Park, I think there's been talk about doing that. So yeah, it's certainly something that groups of individuals can try and get together to persuade the council to do more of that, for sure.
Oh, sorry.
The river in Roberts Park, so I've already got the setup for it because it's got the runoff.
Yeah.
So it's already got like the setup for like a small level of the wind, water generator.
Yeah, and I know that there's been quite a lot of talk about it. I don't know where it got to. I'm a couple of years out of date, but certainly there were plans for it.
They definitely built like the basic of it, the basis of it.
They don't have fish pass.
It's a fish pass.
The main thing got the electricity got cancelled, the price of electricity dropped.
It's right up again now. But now
So it's very short-term thinking there.
the price of electricity is through the roof now. I mean, it must be much more viable to do now.
I think
Yeah.
I heard it got rejected because it wasn't in keeping with the park's vision for the green space. So
Yeah.
there was a sort of conflict of objectives.
Yes, I think I heard something similar to that as well. The heritage argument is a really weird one to me, isn't it? Because Saltaire is a mill, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a mill town, so bringing mills back would be just...
Yeah, well, I think there's space to regenerate the regeneration plan. So.
So they built that fish run that looks a bit nasty, but they're not willing to do new power.
But at the time they were, but maybe we can convince them.
Yeah. It's bonkers, isn't it?
I wanted to know where you can find records about climate change, and I'm quite new to this. So I wanted to know, is there like a climate change information place where you can go pick information up about that, and why is the one in Shipley?
There's what I can do is I'll put together a little list for people about that sort of thing. There's a huge amount of stuff on the internet, basically. I'm not sure whether there's things in the Shipley Library, but lots of different webs. And you've got to be careful with the internet, haven't you, about where you get your information from. So I think that NASA, the American Space Agency, have got a really good website on climate change, explaining it really clearly, nasa.gov.
What if people can't use the internet? Is there no?
I will find out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Make a folder of information.
yeah, I think that would be a good thing to do.
I just don't speak for myself. I speak for other people that
Yes.
that can't access an internet or
No, that's a good point.
And why is it not out there?
There could be stuff in Shipley Library, I don't know.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. Yeah.
But we should be able to put some stuff together or print it out.
Okay, thank
The
you.
Okay.
town council could put something together. Yeah, make it accessible.
Is this yours, Jackie?
It's along the same lines, because we've actually referred to water power from the weir and so on. So where could Shipley or Bradford invest to reduce our carbon footprint? And I've put as the examples solar panels on schools like Saltaire Primary, turbines or water power from the weirs.
So, as in invest your own cash?
As Shipley or Bradford to make that investment. So you've already suggested that Bradford Council could look at using their land as solar farms. Are there any other ways of generating power to reduce our carbon footprint? What other things that could be done to reduce the carbon footprint?
So one thing that quite a lot of European, Scandinavian and Dutch countries do, and some places in the UK as well, is have district heating schemes where you get groups of households, it's like a street level community run energy system, often for heating, so like a heat series of pipes. And we could have district heating schemes in Shipley. It would take quite a bit of work to find out where the best places for it would be, what sort of things. But you could, for example, have I'm not an expert on this, but ground source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps in particular are a great way of taking heat from the ground and warming up buildings. But you need quite a bit of space, and it's not really suitable for most houses unless you've got a massive house, and most people don't. But if you had a group scheme, like a whole street of 50 houses with a district heat system by it, that could be a very good way of cutting emissions. But it does need a bit of research into where you would put it, and is there any land that you could get for someone to do it.
Simon, excuse me. I left my home this evening to see my flue pouring out steam, I assume, from my heating system. Now, I know the flue's there to get rid of the dangerous gases, carbon monoxide and so on, but that's just heat into the environment. Isn't there a way that can be channeled? Every house in Shipley that has heating could be pumped around to somewhere, I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know about your boiler. I know that mine last year was throwing out lots of steam, and we had to get a boiler man in, and he fixed it, and there was a lot less steam coming in. So maybe yours is, you're actually...
It's serviced every year, so the
oh, right, okay.
So
yeah, I mean, the long-term solution to gas boilers is to replace them with air source heat pumps. And it's like my offshore wind thing from 10 years ago, is that air source heat pumps are too expensive for most people right now, but I think 3 or 4 years down the line, that'll be something that is much more affordable for most people. And hopefully the government will put in grants for that as well. I mean, at the moment, doesn't feel like there's a lot of chance of that. But, governments come and go, don't they? Not.
This is a question from our group about if we make changes locally, we feel it'd be important to measure our carbon reduction, so measure somehow quantitatively the reduction in carbon or carbon dioxide. How does one measure carbon dioxide?
Well, so there are various. There isn't one centralised tool where you can just plug it all and do that. It's still a thing that I think is largely in its infancy, but there are lots of different things you can add together to do it. So there are lots of carbon footprinting tools out there which you can use to work out what your emissions are. So you'd have to do it bit by bit. So you would have to look at your transport emissions, and there are spreadsheets out there where you can plug in how many miles I drive, what my car efficiency is. It spits out the answer at the end. Other things are more complicated, like your meat consumption. That takes a bit more effort to work out because you've got to know where. Is it a locally raised cow from the Yorkshire Dales, or is it a soy-fed cow from Brazil? So some elements of this are difficult, but there are certainly footprinting tools out there that I can find for you and give to the group that you might want to have a look at.
I guess it's a feeling of having to add it together based on typical values versus actually having an instrument to monitor the change.
Yeah, you tend not to, you wouldn't have an instrument to measure because it comes from so many places, like the flue for your boiler or the exhaust of your car, or some things like the laptop, and producing that, you're not measuring that because it's made in China or Korea or somewhere. So, yeah, I don't think that would be easy.
What would be the possible CO2 or waste from nuclear and carbon capture? And I suppose for the carbon capture, I mean, I suppose any, actually transporting it to, you said, sort of, deep in the sea, and putting it down. So, what would be the possible for that? It's not making sense there.
No, you are. It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Also, as well, to add on to that, what I wanted to know was, like you were saying about dumping it deep in the sea, but would that not cause problems for the future?
Yeah.
Could leakage and...
So I'll do the two questions separately, one nuclear and then carbon capture. So nuclear energy is very low carbon dioxide in the pollution it produces. CO2, very, very low, lower perhaps even than solar or wind. The big issue with nuclear is that it has a legacy of nuclear waste. And the nuclear waste, we genuinely don't have a long-term management plan for it. It's a very expensive way that we're dealing with at the moment. We would probably have to look after it for 1,000 years or longer. It's what I used to do in the past. I was a nuclear physicist, and it's what got me into environmentalism, is that I was all into how do you build nuclear power stations. I thought it was great. But increasingly I thought it's just not right that we're building these things when we don't yet have a plan for what we do with the waste. And I know that that's a personal view and other people disagree, and quite a lot of people who are environmentalists would say, no, nuclear power it's essential. And I think that's something that is still, debated quite a lot.
And we're dealing with Japan, everyone else. Sellafield is dealing with other people's stuff.
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
So I do think the nuclear waste problem means that we shouldn't do any more new nuclear myself. Carbon capture and storage is an interesting thing in that I think the biggest danger from carbon capture and storage is in fact that it may mean that we delay doing the other things because people go, oh, we'll just capture and store it. It'll all be fine because we keep on burning oil and coal and gas because we'll capture it. It's a very, very expensive and difficult thing to do. Almost every factory or plan for this CCS they've been talking about for 15, 20 years. Nobody's made a profit. Nobody's made it work. It hasn't been regulated into existence. I think to rely heavily on CCS is a mistake. It has a role for sure, but we've got to place it in context that it's not the most important thing. It's probably like 10th in the list of things you need to do. On how you do it, technically it's possible to cut about 90% of the emissions, and it varies. Some CCS, carbon capture and storage, some CCS projects are poor and inefficient. Other ones are very good, and it's been demonstrated in practice. On the leakage point, it shouldn't be a problem because effectively you're taking it into a pipe and then putting it back into the field under the ocean where you got the gas from in the first place. So the gas didn't leak first off, put it down, it's deep in the earth, it's buried under metres of rock and then thousands of metres of sea. It should be pressurised. It shouldn't escape. But there is always a risk. You're right that it could leak.
Fracking.
Fracking, yeah, that's very different, isn't it? I think CCS is burying it really, really very deep in the bottom of the ocean. Fracking is.
You see, it was there originally and didn't leak. It hadn't been penetrated. We put down a drill and created a compromise.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got one last question. I'm noticing there's lots of questions about housing, so I think maybe that's something we need to look at in another session if there's a pointer towards that.
That's a good idea because I don't know very much about housing.
Oh, sorry.
With what you said about nuclear, do you mean like nuclear fusion and fission? Because I'm going to say fission is fission the one where you combine two atoms?
No, that's fusion.
Oh, fusion.
So fission is the one that's all the nuclear power stations around the world are fission reactors. And fusion is a thing, but I think that fusion has always been the technology that people say it's 40 years away. And they said that 40 years ago, and they're still saying it's 40 years away. I don't think it would be wonderful if that works, but I do not think we can rely on it in any way. We just assume that if it happens, research it, great, but we've got to assume that won't do anything for the crisis we're in at the minute.
Fusion plant in the UK.
Yeah, there's plenty of laboratories and people are researching it. The Swiss and the Americans and the Japanese. There's a
full-on plant that they're making.
Yeah.
Like, it's meant to be a power plant rather than a research plant.
Yeah. I'm happy to have a look at it, for sure.
My question is more on the social element.
Oh, sorry.
My question is more on the social element of citizens' juries, right? Is there a chance of making them more clinical and methodical, so that, like, maybe we talk to local councillors?
Make them more what, sorry?
Clinical and methodical.
Clinical and methodical.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Bring them to streamline them with the local legislation, have them say as one-on-one sessions with, say, local legislators, and then they can take them up to local assembly. That way we have more, not just pedestrian, but more understandable elements of what we talk about as citizens, not just have it from experts on one end, but say from local people around and constituents, for example, right, on what they see going on in their own constituencies compared to, say, having someone, say, from Westminster lobbying for climate change in Shipley.
On the plan we've got, there's 3 sessions that you choose what it's going to be.
Right.
So if that's what everybody wants to do, then yeah, certainly we could do that. Yeah.
Put it in the suggestion box.
Put it in the suggestion.
First one in.
That's what they mean.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we need to say thank you to Simon.